The phone rang at 2:15 in the morning. I know the exact time because I watched the red digits on my alarm clock shift from 2:14 before I finally reached for the receiver. At 70 years old, a call at that hour usually means a structure has failed somewhere, a pipe burst, a heart stopped, or a life collapsed. My hand was shaking before I even brought the phone to my ear. "Dad. Oh God, Dad, you have to help us." It was David. My son. The boy who used to sit at my drafting table and color in the blueprints of skyscrapers. He was sobbing, his voice ragged and wet with panic. "It's Elena." She collapsed in the kitchen. "The doctors say it's a cerebral aneurysm. They need to operate now, but the specialist is out of network. They want $45,000 up front, or they won't scrub in." I sat up, the cold hardwood floor chilling my bare feet. $45,000. It was a massive sum, but for family. For the woman my son loved. I was already mentally calculating which bonds to liquidate, reaching for the authentication token on my nightstand. "I'll handle it, David. Just breathe. Let me get my..." "Hurry, Dad. Please. She's dying." And then, the connection crackled. It wasn't the sterile beep of a hospital monitor. It was a whisper, sharp, impatient, and terrifyingly clear against the backdrop of my son's performance. "Make it sound wetter, David. He's rich, not psychic." My hand froze in midair. The darkness in the room seemed to solidify, pressing against my chest like a collapsed beam. That wasn't the voice of a dying woman. That was the voice of a director. I didn't scream. I didn't ask for an explanation. I simply pressed the button to end the call, placed the phone back on the nightstand, and sat in the silence of a house that had just been stripped of its last illusion. I did not go back to sleep. I couldn't. My mind, trained by 40 years of structural engineering, began to race, analyzing the stress points of the conversation I had just survived. I thought about the specific phrasing, out-of-network specialist, upfront payment. These were high-pressure terms designed to bypass logic and trigger an emotional override. It was a demolition charge planted at the base of my paternal instinct, timed to detonate before I could check the blueprints. I sat there in the dark, listening to the wind howl off Lake Michigan, rattling the window panes of the home I had built for a family that no longer existed. I needed to see the damage. I needed to verify the structural integrity of the lie. I stood up, my knees popping slightly in the cold, and walked down the hallway to my study. This room was my sanctuary, the place where I had designed 3 of Chicago's most resilient high-rises. It was also where Martha, my late wife, had insisted I install the monitors. "You trust too easily, Arthur," she had told me a month before the cancer took her. "You look at blueprints and see geometry. I look at people and see cracks." She had made me install a remote security system in David's house, a housewarming gift that came with a hidden clause. The admin access remained with me. I had never used it. It felt like a violation of my son's privacy, a breach of the trust one thought was the foundation of our relationship. But foundations can rot. I sat in my leather chair and woke my computer. The screen's blue light washed over my hands, hands that had signed tuition checks, car loans, and the down payment for the very house I was about to look into. I typed in the IP address and the admin password Martha had made me memorize, trust but verify. The screen flickered, loading the feed from the 4 cameras installed in the common areas of David's suburban home. I expected darkness. I expected an empty house, its occupants racing to a hospital while I sat here, a paranoid old man who had misheard a whisper in the static. I did not see darkness. The feed from the living room camera resolved into sharp, high-definition color. The lights were on. The television was playing a muted action movie, the blue flashes illuminating the room in strobing pulses. And there, sitting on the beige sectional I had bought them for their anniversary, were my son and his dying wife. They were not at a hospital. They were not in crisis. Elena was sitting cross-legged in her pajamas, a slice of pepperoni pizza in one hand and a glass of red wine in the other. She looked bored, impatient, checking her nails against the light of the TV. David was pacing the room, his phone still clutched in his hand. Even on the silent feed, I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he ran his hand through his hair, a nervous tic he had developed in childhood whenever he lied about his homework. He said something to Elena, gesturing wildly with the phone. She didn't look up. She simply took a bite of her pizza and pointed at the laptop open on the coffee table. I zoomed in on the feed. The laptop screen was glowing with a familiar interface, the login page of my bank. The nausea hit me then, a physical blow that nearly doubled me over. They weren't just asking for money, they were waiting for me to unlock the door so they could rob the vault. The emergency was a distraction, a way to get me to move funds into a transfer-ready account, or perhaps to guilt me into sharing a two-factor authentication code. I watched as Elena set down her wine glass and typed something onto the laptop. She paused, looked at David, and laughed. It wasn't a warm laugh. It was the sharp, jagged movement of a predator playing with its food. I watched them for 10 minutes. 10 minutes of my son pacing like a caged animal while his wife, the woman who had supposedly suffered a cerebral aneurysm, scrolled through her phone and ate dinner. I saw the dynamics clearly for the first time. David wasn't a partner in this, he was a subordinate. He looked terrified, exhausted, his eyes darting to the front door as if he expected the police to kick it in. Elena, however, was calm. She was the architect of this disaster. She was the one who had whispered the command. Make it sound wetter. She was directing him, pushing him, using his love for her as a lever to pry open my life's savings. I thought about the last 2 years. The small loans that were never repaid. The investments David had pitched me that never materialized. The way Elena had slowly isolated us, canceling Sunday dinners, claiming she was uncomfortable in my large, empty house, suggesting that my presence was a burden on their young family. I had excused it all. I had told myself that grief makes people difficult, that young couples struggle, that it was my job as the father to be the load-bearing wall that took the weight without complaint. But a load-bearing wall has a limit. If you exceed the stress capacity, it doesn't just bend, it shears. I reached for the phone on my desk, my finger hovering over the speed dial for the police. But I stopped. The police would take a report. They would knock on the door. David would deny it. Elena would spin a story about a misunderstanding, claim it was a prank, or worse, claim I was senile and confused. I needed more than a live feed. I needed a dossier. I needed to understand how deep the rot went before I started the demolition. On the screen, David slumped onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. Elena patted his back, not with affection, but with the dismissive pat one gives a dog that has failed the trick. She said something else, then turned back to the laptop. She began typing again, faster this time. My phone buzzed on the desk. A text message from my bank, authentication code 890442. Do not share this code. They were trying to brute force the password reset. They were trying to break in while I was still awake. I looked at the router blinking in the corner of my study, the digital vein that connected my home to the world and to them. If I acted now, if I screamed, if I fought, they would know I was onto them. They would go underground. They would hide the evidence. Elena would become the victim, and I would become the abusive, paranoid father-in-law. No. That was the old Arthur's reaction. The new Arthur, the one born in the silence of the last 20 minutes, had to think like an engineer. I reached behind the tower of my computer and found the Ethernet cable. I didn't unplug it. Instead, I opened the network settings on my secure server, the one I used for archiving my architectural schematics. I initiated a lockdown protocol, a script I had written years ago to secure my intellectual property. It severed all external connection requests to my IP address and rerouted all incoming traffic to a dummy server. On the screen, I watched Elena freeze. She hit the enter key. Nothing happened. She hit it again, harder. She turned to David, her face twisting into a mask of sudden, ugly rage. She threw her hands up, shouting something that made David flinch. The feed cut out a second later as the lockdown took effect, plunging my study into static. I sat in the darkness, the hum of the hard drives the only sound in the room. I was alone. My wife was gone. My son was a thief. My daughter-in-law was a monster. The foundations of my life had not just cracked, they had been pulverized. But I was still standing. I pulled open the bottom drawer of my desk and took out a fresh legal pad and a drafting pen. I wrote the date at the top of the page. Then I wrote a single name, underlined it twice. Elena Sterling. I wasn't going to just stop the transfer. I was going to condemn the building. The drive to the bank was a study in grayscale, the Chicago skyline hidden behind a curtain of falling snow that muted the world to a dull, oppressive white. I parked my sedan in the lot of the First National branch on State Street, the windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the ice. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my chest felt hollow, as if the structural steel holding me together had been stripped away during the night. I had spent 40 years designing buildings to withstand wind shear and seismic shifts, but nothing in my training had prepared me for the demolition of my own family. I checked my watch, 8:59 a.m., and waited for the guard to unlock the glass doors, watching the vapor of my breath fog the cold window. Robert Vance, the branch manager and a man I had known since we were both junior draftsmen with more ambition than sense, met me at the door. He didn't offer the usual handshake or the joke about my retirement golf handicap. Instead, his face was tight, his eyes avoiding mine as he ushered me quickly toward his private office in the back. The bank was quiet, filled only with the soft hum of heating vents and the muffled sounds of tellers counting cash drawers. I sat in the leather chair opposite his desk, keeping my coat on, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the winter storm outside. Robert closed the door and turned the blinds, sealing us in a box of artificial light and impending disaster. "Arthur, I'm glad you came in," Robert said, his voice dropping to that professional, hushed tone people use at funerals. "I tried to call you last week about the unusual activity, but David told me you were traveling in Europe and couldn't be disturbed." He turned his monitor around, revealing a spreadsheet that looked less like a financial statement and more like a crime scene. When the transfer request for $45,000 came through last night, our fraud algorithm flagged it immediately because of the time and the IP address. But that's not what worries me. It's this. He pointed to a line item dated 3 months prior. I leaned forward, putting on my reading glasses, trying to make sense of the numbers that were dancing before my tired eyes. There, in stark black and white, was a home equity line of credit opened against my property for $200,000. Below it were a series of withdrawals, $10,000 here, $15,000 there, totaling nearly $80,000 in just 90 days. I never opened a line of credit, I said, my voice sounding calm, detached, as if I were pointing out a flaw in someone else's blueprints. My house is paid off. I haven't carried debt since 1998. Robert nodded grimly and pulled a file from his drawer, sliding a document across the polished mahogany desk. I pulled the application this morning. It has your signature, Arthur. And it was notarized. I looked at the paper. The signature at the bottom was mine, the sharp, angular, the looping S that trailed off at the end. It was the signature I had placed on thousands of architectural drawings, the mark of approval that meant a building was safe to stand. But looking closer, I saw the flaw. The pressure was too even, the ink too uniform. It lacked the microscopic hesitations of a human hand. It was a tracing, or perhaps a stamp made from a high-resolution scan of my professional seal. It's a forgery, I said, pushing the paper back. A good one, but a forgery. And the notary? Robert sighed, rubbing his temples. We checked. The notary is a friend of your daughter-in-law's sister. They claim you signed it at your kitchen table. The room seemed to tilt. This wasn't just a desperate grab for cash in the middle of the night. This was a foundation laid months ago, a systematic tunneling under my financial life. Elena hadn't just decided to rob me at 2:15 a.m. She had been constructing this trap while sitting at my dinner table, pouring my wine, and asking about my day. Freeze it, I said. Freeze everything. The checking, the savings, the investment accounts. I want a full audit, Robert. Every penny that has left this institution in the last 12 months needs to be accounted for. Robert began typing furiously, his face pale. I'll start the fraud protocol immediately. But Arthur, the authorized user on the credit line, is David. If we file this as criminal fraud, the police will be involved. You know what that means for him. I looked out the window at the swirling snow. I thought of David pacing in his living room, the phone in his hand, terrified and compliant. I thought of the way he had looked at Elena, like a dog waiting for a kick or a treat. He was complicit, yes. He had signed the checks. He had lied to Robert about me being in Europe. But was he the architect, or was he just another brick in her wall? Do it, I said, standing up. My son is a grown man. If he helped dig the hole, he can explain why he's holding the shovel. I left the bank 10 minutes later, clutching a folder of evidence that weighed heavy in my hand. The cold air hit me like a physical blow, freezing the moisture in my eyes. I walked to my car, my boots crunching on the salted pavement, feeling the isolation of my position. I was 70 years old, a widower, and now, for all intents and purposes, childless. The grief I had been holding back since Martha's death finally found a crack in my armor, seeping in with the cold. I sat in the driver's seat, staring at the gray steering wheel, unable to turn the key. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a harsh, mechanical vibration that made me jump. I pulled it out, expecting a call from Robert or perhaps a confirmation from the security company. It was neither. The name on the screen was David. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the screen. Part of me, the father who had bandaged his scraped knees and taught him to drive, wanted to answer, to hear an apology, to hear him say it was all a mistake. But the engineer in me knew better. The engineer knew that once a structure is compromised, you do not enter it until it has been stabilized. I opened the text message instead. Dad. She died. The aneurysm burst on the way to the hospital. We didn't have the money for the specialist. She's gone. I hope you're happy. You killed her." The words sat there on the screen, absolute and horrifying. For a split second, the world stopped. The logic, the camera feeds, the pizza, it all vanished under the weight of that sentence. She died. Doubt, sharp and agonizing, pierced through me. What if the pizza was from earlier? What if the camera feed was delayed? What if I had misjudged the situation and let my daughter-in-law die over money I could have easily spared? The guilt surged up my throat, acidic and choking. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Then, I closed my eyes and forced myself to breathe. Foundations, I told myself. Look at the foundations. I unlocked my phone and opened the security app again. I needed to see. I needed to know. The feed loaded slowly, buffering against the weak cellular signal. When the image finally resolved, it showed the living room of David's house. It was empty now, the pizza box gone, the pillows straightened. But the timestamp in the corner read 9:22 a.m. I switched to the garage camera. David's car was gone. But Elena's SUV was still there. And then, movement. In the hallway camera, a figure walked past. It was Elena. She was wearing a black dress, holding a phone to her ear, pacing back and forth. She didn't look dead. She didn't look like a woman who had just suffered a catastrophic brain hemorrhage. She looked annoyed. She stopped in front of the hallway mirror, adjusted her hair, and practiced a frown. I watched as she wiped invisible tears from her dry cheeks, rehearsing the face of a grieving widower's wife, or perhaps a grieving husband's proxy. The text was a lie. A nuclear auction designed to break me, to send me spiraling into guilt so deep I would sign whatever they put in front of me just to make the pain stop. It was the cruelest thing anyone had ever done to me. And it clarified everything. I put the car in gear and pulled out of the lot. The sadness was gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. They wanted to play with death. Fine. I would show them what a ghost could really do. I drove toward the cemetery where Martha was buried, the only person left in this world who had never lied to me. The cemetery gates were open, two wrought iron sentinels standing guard against the driving snow. I drove slowly down the winding path, the tires crunching over fresh powder, until I reached the plot where Martha rested. The granite headstone was already capped with a layer of white, and I brushed it off with my gloved hand, the stone cold and unyielding beneath my fingers. Standing there in the silence, surrounded by thousands of people who could no longer speak, the cruelty of David's text message hit me with a new, sharper force. They had used death, the very thing that had shattered my world 2 years ago, as a tactical weapon. They had weaponized my grief to bypass my logic, gambling that the trauma of losing my wife would blind me to the absurdity of losing my daughter-in-law. They tried to kill her off, Martha, I said aloud, my breath forming clouds in the frigid air. They thought I would break. They thought I would sign the checks just to make the hurting stop. I stared at her name carved into the stone, remembering the woman who had been my partner in every sense of the word. Martha hadn't been an architect, but she understood people the way I understood steel. She knew where the load-bearing walls were in a conversation, and she knew exactly when a facade was about to crumble. In her final months, even as the medication clouded her mind, her eyes had remained sharp, watching Elena with a quiet, terrifying intensity that I had mistaken for confusion. I remembered the last time we spoke clearly, 3 days before she passed. She had called me into the bedroom, her voice barely a whisper, forcing me to lean close. "Arthur," she had said, gripping my hand with surprising strength. When I'm gone, you're going to be lonely. And lonely men make mistakes." She had paused to catch her breath, her eyes locking onto mine. "If you ever feel like you're losing control, if things with David ever shift, go to the sewing room. The blue velvet box in the bottom drawer of the cedar chest. It's not my jewelry, Arthur. Promise me you'll look." I had promised her, thinking she was talking about a sentimental keepsake, perhaps a letter or a memento she wanted me to have when the grief became too much. I had never opened it. After the funeral, I had closed the door to the sewing room and left it untouched, a shrine to the woman who had filled it with the hum of her machine and the scent of lavender. But standing there in the snow, with the ghost of a fake aneurysm hanging over my head, I realized Martha hadn't been giving me a keepsake. She had been giving me a contingency plan. I drove home with a sense of urgency that bordered on panic. The house was silent when I entered, the shadows of the afternoon stretching long across the hardwood floors. I didn't take off my coat. I walked straight to the sewing room at the end of the hall and pushed open the door. The air inside was stale, preserved like a museum exhibit. Her fabric shears were still on the table, a half-finished quilt lay folded on the chair. I walked to the cedar chest under the window, the smell of aromatic wood rising to meet me as I lifted the heavy lid. The blue velvet box was exactly where she said it would be, tucked beneath a stack of linen patterns. It was heavy, heavier than a jewelry box had any right to be. I carried it to the desk and set it down, my hands trembling slightly. I wasn't afraid of what I would find, I was afraid of what it would confirm. I unlatched the brass clasp and lifted the lid. There were no diamonds inside, no pearls, no gold. Instead, there was a thick manila envelope, sealed with red tape, and a flash drive taped to the top of it. I opened the envelope and slid the contents onto the desk. It was a dossier. A comprehensive, professional background check compiled by a private investigator named Sam Miller. The date on the first page was 6 months before Martha died. She had hired a PI while she was dying. She had spent her final days not just fighting cancer, but investigating the woman who had married our son. I felt a wave of awe wash over me. Even facing the end, Martha had been protecting the foundation of this family. I turned the page and felt the blood drain from my face. The photograph clipped to the top of the report was unmistakably Elena. She looked younger, perhaps 5 years prior, her hair a lighter shade of blonde, standing next to an older man in front of a luxury sedan. But the name listed underneath was not Elena Sterling. It was Sophia Vance. Subject: Sophia Vance, aka Elena Sterling, aka Victoria Clark, the report began. DOB, unknown. Place of birth, unknown. Pattern of activity involves targeting single or widowed males with substantial assets, or the sons of such individuals. I read on, my eyes scanning the dry, clinical language that described a predator's career. There was a dentist in Ohio named Dr. Robert Evans who had lost his practice and his pension. There was a retired contractor in Florida who had signed over his deed and was now living in a state-subsidized facility. The methodology was identical in every case. She didn't work alone. She found a weak link, a son, a nephew, a lonely boyfriend, and turned him into a weapon against the patriarch. She isolated the victim, created financial emergencies, and slowly transferred assets into shell accounts before initiating the final phase, guardianship. She would claim the older victim was mentally incompetent, using their confusion and grief against them to seize legal control. I flipped to the section labeled Current Target, Arthur Sterling. Martha had highlighted this page. The notes were in her handwriting, the shaky script of a woman writing from her deathbed. She asks about your bonds, Arthur. She asks about the trust. She's trying to get David to sign the power of attorney documents. Do not sign. Do not trust. I looked at the photos attached to the back of the file. There was one of Elena, Sophia, sitting in a cafe with a man I didn't recognize. They were leaning close, looking at documents. The PI's note on the back read, "Meeting with local forger, Chicago, March 14th. That was 2 months before Martha died. Elena had been planning the forgery of the line of credit while my wife was still alive, perhaps even while she was visiting Martha in the hospice wing, holding her hand and feigning tears. I sat back in the chair, the room spinning slightly. The text message about Elena's death wasn't just a lie, it was a distraction. While I was supposed to be grieving, while I was supposed to be paralyzed by the guilt of killing my daughter-in-law, she would have moved to the next step. She would have used my emotional collapse as proof of my incompetence. She would have filed for emergency custody, claiming I was delusional, paranoid, a danger to myself. I picked up the last piece of paper in the stack. It was a handwritten note from Sam Miller, the investigator. It was dated 2 weeks after Martha's funeral. He must have mailed it to the house, and I had simply placed it in the box without looking, too buried in grief to function. Mr. Sterling, if you are reading this, your wife has passed. I am sorry for your loss. Martha was a formidable woman. She asked me to stop the investigation when she entered hospice, said she didn't want you to know until you were ready. But you need to know this, the subject doesn't leave when the money runs out. She leaves when the host is dry. She will try to put you in a home. She has done it twice before. Watch your medical records. Watch your food. And whatever you do, do not let her inside your house. I stared at the words "watch your food." I thought about the casseroles Elena had brought over in the weeks following the funeral. The sudden bouts of dizziness I had experienced, which I had attributed to grief and exhaustion. The vitamins she had urged me to take. The rage that rose in me then was cold and absolute, a structural hardening of the soul. I wasn't just fighting a greedy daughter-in-law. I was fighting a parasite that had been feeding on my family for years. I reached for my phone and dialed the number stamped on the investigator's letterhead. It rang 4 times before a gruff voice answered. Miller Investigations. Mr. Miller, I said, my voice steady, my eyes fixed on the photograph of the woman who called herself Elena. My name is Arthur Sterling. You worked for my wife, Martha. I think it's time we finished the job. Sam Miller's office was located above a dry cleaner on the south side of the city, a single room that smelled of steam presses and stale tobacco. He was a man carved from granite, sitting behind a desk cluttered with files, looking exactly as he had in the brief moments I had seen him at Martha's funeral, a silent observer in the back row. He didn't stand when I entered. He just gestured to the wooden chair opposite him and tapped the blue velvet box I had placed on the Formica surface. I wondered when you'd open that, Miller said, his voice a low rumble like gravel in a mixer. Martha bet me $50 you'd wait a year. Said you respected privacy too much to snoop, even if she gave you permission. He opened a drawer, pulled out a bottle of cheap bourbon, and poured 2 fingers into a paper cup. He didn't offer me any. She was a hell of a woman, Mr. Sterling. Smart. Saw around corners while the rest of us were staring at the wall. She knew, I said, the realization still settling in my gut like wet concrete. She knew about Elena before she died. She knew Sophia was trouble the minute she walked into your house wearing shoes that cost more than your son's car, Miller corrected. Martha hired me to dig. We found the Ohio connection about 3 weeks before she went into hospice. She wanted to tell you, but the doctor said the stress, well. He shrugged, a heavy, tired movement. She made a call. Said to let you find it in your own time. Said if Elena, or whatever she calls herself now, was actually decent, the box would stay closed. If she wasn't, well, here you are. He opened the dossier on his desk, spreading out photos of a life built on lies. We need to call Robert Evans, Miller said, pointing to a name in the file. The dentist from Dayton. He's the only one who fought back, and he's the only one who lost everything because of it. We made the call on a burner phone Miller kept in his desk. The voice that answered on the third ring sounded brittle, like dried leaves. Dr. Robert Evans was a man who had been hollowed out. When I introduced myself, there was a long silence, followed by a sigh that sounded like a building finally settling into its ruin. I thought she'd retired, Evans said softly. Or maybe I just hoped she died. Is she using the name Elena now? Yes, I said. She's married to my son. She's targeting me. Listen to me carefully, Mr. Sterling. Evans's voice sharpened, shedding its exhaustion for urgency. The money is just the appetizer. The credit lines, the loans, that's just to test your defenses. Her real goal isn't theft, it's total control. In Ohio, she didn't just rob me. She filed for emergency guardianship. I felt the blood in my veins turn to ice water. Guardianship. She'll claim you're incompetent, Evans continued, the words tumbling out now. She'll say you're confusing reality, that you're paranoid, that you're a danger to yourself. She did it to me after I caught her forging a check. She told the court I was hallucinating, that I had dementia. She had recordings of me shouting, recordings she provoked, and she played them for a judge who didn't know any better. She got control of my medical decisions, my assets, my home. By the time I proved I was sane, the accounts were empty and the house was sold. I thought of the text message from David. She died. You killed her. The cruelty of it hadn't just been to inflict pain. It was a strategic plant. If I had reacted, if I had called 911 screaming that my daughter-in-law was dead and the police arrived to find her alive and well, I would look insane. I would look like a grieving old man who had lost his grip on reality. The 2:15 a.m. call, that aneurysm, the text, it was all designed to build a documented history of my cognitive decline. She's building a case, I whispered. She's building a cage, Evans corrected. Get a lawyer. Get a doctor. Get everything on record today. Because once she files that petition, you're not a person anymore. You're a ward of the state. I thanked him and hung up. Miller looked at me, his eyes dark. You need to go home, Arthur. You need to secure the perimeter. If Evans is right, the paperwork is already in motion. I drove home with the speedometer needle burying itself in the red. The snow had stopped, leaving the world bright and blindingly white. My house, the brick colonial I had designed myself, with its reinforced steel frame and triple-paned windows, stood silent against the winter sky. It looked strong. But I knew better than anyone that strength isn't about how thick the walls are, it's about what's happening in the basement. I spent the next 3 hours turning my home into a fortress of evidence. I backed up the server logs from the night before to 3 separate cloud accounts. I located the hard drive containing the camera footage of the pizza party and taped it to the underside of a floorboard in the pantry, a hiding spot Martha used to use for emergency cash. I called my personal physician, Dr. Aris, and scheduled an immediate cognitive evaluation for the next morning. I needed proof that my mind was as sharp as my drafting pencils. I was in the kitchen, brewing a pot of black coffee, when the doorbell rang. It wasn't the frantic pounding of a family emergency. It was the polite, firm press of official business. I checked the monitor. A man in a beige trench coat stood on the porch, holding a thick envelope. He wasn't David. He wasn't the police. I opened the door. The cold air rushed in, smelling of snow and ozone. "Arthur Sterling?" the man asked. He looked bored, a man who delivered bad news for a living and had long ago stopped caring about the impact. "Yes. You've been served." He thrust the envelope into my hand and turned to walk away before I could even grip the paper. I closed the door and locked it. My hands were steady, but my heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I carried the envelope to the kitchen table and tore it open. The document was thick, stamped with the seal of the Cook County Circuit Court. Petition for Emergency Temporary Guardianship. Petitioner, Elena Sterling. Respondent, Arthur Sterling. I scanned the legal jargon, the paragraphs of lies woven together with terrifying skill. Respondent has exhibited signs of rapid cognitive decline following the death of his spouse. Respondent suffers from auditory hallucinations, claiming to receive phone calls that never occurred. Respondent has become paranoid and aggressive toward family members. On the night of January 12, respondent hallucinated a medical emergency involving the petitioner, becoming verbally abusive and refusing to assist. And there, stapled to the back, was an affidavit signed by David Sterling. My father is confused. He thinks my wife is dead. He sent me texts accusing us of stealing from him. I am afraid for his safety. He needs professional supervision. They had moved faster than I anticipated. The hearing was scheduled for Friday, 48 hours from now. They didn't want a fight, they wanted a slaughter. They wanted to walk into a courtroom, present a confused, grieving old man, and walk out with the keys to my life. I set the papers down next to the cold cup of coffee. I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me, the same calm I used to feel when a project manager told me a deadline was impossible. Panic is for amateurs. Architects deal in solutions. Elena had made a critical error. She had assumed the structure was weak because the facade was weathered. She had assumed that because I was quiet, I was broken. She had assumed that grief had rotted the beams. She was about to learn that some foundations are made of reinforced concrete. I picked up my phone and dialed Miller. They filed, I said. Now we go on the offensive. Find out where she's staying. And Sam. Find out what leverage she has on my son. David is weak, but he's not evil. If he signed this, it's because she has a gun to his head. I'm on it, Miller growled. What are you going to do? I looked at the security monitor, at the empty driveway where my family used to park. I'm going to invite them to dinner, I said. I spent the afternoon preparing my home for a performance I had never hoped to give. In my career, I had designed lobbies meant to intimidate and penthouses meant to impress, but today I was designing a stage set for a tragedy. I deliberately left a stack of unopened mail on the hallway console, spilling over in a messy cascade. I brewed a pot of tea and left the cup sitting on the counter until a skin formed on the surface, a subtle sign of forgetfulness. I even went into the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face, letting the droplets dry without a towel to give my skin a sheen of clammy exhaustion. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see Arthur Sterling, the man who had overseen the construction of the skyline's sharpest peaks. I saw a widower in a cardigan that was slightly too large, his shoulders slumped, his eyes bewildered. It was a disguise made of my own worst fears. If Elena wanted a senile old man to drag before a judge, I would give her one. The key to any successful trap is not the strength of the bars, but the appeal of the bait. They arrived at 6 p.m. sharp. I watched them on the monitor from my study before heading downstairs, Elena checking her reflection in the glass of the front door, smoothing her hair with the practiced vanity of a news anchor before a broadcast. David stood behind her, staring at his shoes, his posture that of a man waiting for a sentencing hearing. I waited for the bell to ring twice before answering, shuffling to the door with a hesitation that wasn't real. When I opened the door, the woman who had supposedly died of a brain aneurysm 30 hours prior was standing there holding a foil-covered dish. She looked radiant. Her skin was flushed with health, her makeup flawless, her smile tight and sympathetic. There was no sign of medical trauma, no hospital bracelet, not even a shadow of fatigue. It was a resurrection performed not by miracle, but by audacity. "Dad," she said, her voice chirping with a cloying sweetness that made my teeth ache. "We were so worried when you called. We brought lasagna." I stood in the doorway, gripping the frame as if for support, and let my eyes widen. I looked from her to David, then back to her. "Elena?" I whispered, letting my voice crack. "But the text." David sent a text. He said you were gone." Elena stepped inside, brushing past me with a scent of expensive perfume and ozone. She set the lasagna on the console table, right next to the pile of neglected mail, and turned to face me with a look of pity that was almost perfectly executed. "Dad, what are you talking about? David didn't send any text. We've been home all day. You called us, remember? You were screaming about money and doctors. We were terrified." She looked at David. "Tell him, honey." David didn't look at me. He looked at the coat rack. I didn't text you, Dad. You must have dreamt it. Or maybe you misread something on the news." His voice was hollow, a script being read by a hostage. "Elena is fine. See? She's right here." I let myself stumble backward a step, putting a hand to my forehead. "No," I muttered, pacing the hallway in a tight, agitated circle. "I saw it. 9:22 a.m. It said she died. It said you killed her. I saw it, David." Elena walked over and gently took my arm. Her grip was firm, controlling. "Dad, let's look at your phone. If David sent a text, it would be there, right?" I pulled my phone from my pocket. I had anticipated this. I knew that if I handed it to her, she would delete the message faster than I could blink. Or, more likely, she had used a spoofing app that erased the trace on her end, leaving me with a ghost message that she would claim was a hallucination. But I played the part. I unlocked the screen, my hands shaking violently, a tremor I had practiced for an hour in front of the mirror. I opened the message thread with David. It was empty. My heart hammered against my ribs, not from fear, but from the realization of how thorough she was. She must have accessed my cloud account remotely and scrubbed the message, or perhaps David had access to my phone backups. It didn't matter how she did it, what mattered was the effect. "It's gone," I whispered, staring at the screen. "It was right here. See?" Elena said softly, patting my hand. "There's nothing there, Dad. You're just tired. It's been a hard 2 years. Grief does strange things to the mind. My grandmother used to see things too, right before she had to go into the home. The threat was subtle, wrapped in concern, but it landed with the weight of a sledgehammer. The home. She was laying the groundwork right here in my hallway. I looked up at her, letting my lower lip tremble. I don't understand. I could have sworn. Let's eat, she said, steering me toward the dining room like a wayward child. You need protein. You look thin. The dinner was an exercise in torture. I sat at the head of the table where I had presided over Thanksgiving turkeys and Christmas hens, picking at the store-bought lasagna Elena had plated for me. David ate quickly, eyes on his plate, drinking wine as if it were water. Elena dominated the conversation, steering every topic back to my inability to manage. The driveway wasn't shoveled, Dad, she noted, cutting a piece of bread with surgical precision. And I noticed a lot of final notices in that pile by the door. Are you having trouble keeping track of the bills? I nodded slowly, staring into my wine glass. It's overwhelming. The numbers get mixed up. Sometimes I write a check and I can't remember if I signed it. That's dangerous, she said, leaning forward. Her eyes glittered in the candlelight. You could lose the house if you're not careful. Taxes, insurance, it's a lot for one person. Especially someone in your condition. My condition, I repeated. The confusion, Arthur, she said, using my first name. It was a breach of protocol, a subtle dominance play. The hallucinations. The paranoia. David told me you accused us of stealing from you last night. Do you remember that? I looked at David. He flinched. I had a bad dream, I stammered. I thought someone was hacking the account. I checked the cameras, but maybe I imagined that too. Elena smiled. It was the smile of a wolf watching a lamb limp away from the flock. We turned off the cameras weeks ago, Dad. David disconnected them to save power. If you saw something on the monitor, that's very worrying. She was lying, of course. The cameras were recording right now. I had rerouted the feed to a hidden server, and a tiny lens concealed in the dining room chandelier was capturing every frame of her smug face. But she felt safe. She felt that she had successfully rewritten reality. I don't know what to do, I said, putting my fork down. I feel like I'm losing my grip. Martha always handled the paperwork. Without her, the house is just so big. So empty. Elena reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. Her skin was cold. You don't have to do it alone, Dad. We can help. We can take the burden off your shoulders. David and I were talking, maybe it's time to simplify things. Let us handle the accounts. Let us deal with the maintenance. You shouldn't be worrying about mortgages at your age. I looked at her, letting hope, pathetic, desperate hope, fill my face. You would do that? After I accused you. We're family, she said. We forgive you. But we need to make it official. The bank won't talk to us unless we have the authority to act on your behalf. Just for the bills. Just to keep you safe. Authority, I mumbled. Like a power of attorney. Exactly, she said, the word leaving her mouth like a sigh of relief. It's just a piece of paper, Dad. It just lets us sign the checks so you don't have to worry. I looked at David. David? Is this what you want? He finally looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed, filled with a misery so profound it was painful to witness. He opened his mouth, and for a second, I thought he might warn me. I thought he might scream run. It's for the best, Dad, he croaked. She She knows what she's doing. I slumped back in my chair, exhaling a long, defeated breath. Okay, I said. Okay. I can't fight the numbers anymore. Bring the papers. I'll sign whatever you need. The victory in Elena's eyes was absolute. She didn't even try to hide the smirk that curled the corner of her mouth. She had won. The old man was broken, the fortress had fallen, and the loot was hers for the taking. We'll bring the lawyer by later this week, she said, standing up briskly. Rest now, Dad. Don't worry about anything. We're in charge now. They left 10 minutes later. I stood in the doorway and watched them drive away, shivering in the cold air. I waited until their taillights disappeared around the curve of the street. Then, I closed the door and locked it. I walked back to the dining room. I stood straight, rolling my shoulders to shake off the slump of the old man. I picked up the wine glass Elena had used, holding it by the stem. I carried it into the kitchen and placed it carefully into a Ziploc bag, sealing it tight. DNA evidence, just in case she tried to deny she was ever here. Then I went to my study and pulled up the footage. The audio was crystal clear. You could lose the house. The cameras were disconnected weeks ago. You're hallucinating. Every lie, every threat, every manipulation was preserved in high-definition digital audio. She had admitted to gaslighting me. She had lied about the cameras. She had coerced me into agreeing to financial control based on fabricated medical evidence. I saved the file and emailed a copy to Sam Miller and my lawyer. Then I picked up the phone. Sam, I said when he answered. She took the bait. She thinks I'm ready to sign. She's bringing a lawyer later this week. Good, Miller rumbled. Because we found something on David. You were right about the leverage. Tell me. It's not just embezzlement, Miller said. She has him on tape, Arthur. It looks like she drugged him and staged a compromising situation with a minor. It's a deep fake, Arthur. A high-quality AI fabrication. But she's threatening to send it to his firm and the police if he walks away. My hand tightened on the phone until the plastic creaked. A deep fake. She wasn't just holding my son hostage with debt, she was holding him with a digital nuclear bomb that would destroy his life, his reputation, and his freedom. She's a monster, I whispered. She's a professional, Miller corrected. But professionals get arrogant. She thinks she's won. When is the signing? She didn't give a date, I said. But she will. She's hungry. Get her to commit to a time, Miller said. We'll be ready. And Arthur. Don't eat the lasagna. I looked at the foil-covered dish on the counter. I didn't plan to. I walked over to the trash can and scraped the entire casserole into the bin. Then I took the dish outside and smashed it into the recycling bin, the sound of breaking ceramic echoing satisfyingly in the cold night air. The performance was over. Now, the demolition began. The next morning, I drove to the financial district. David worked at a mid-sized accounting firm on LaSalle Street, a place of gray carpets and fluorescent lights that hummed with the quiet desperation of people managing other people's money. I didn't call ahead. If I had, Elena would have known. She monitored his calls, his texts, his location. I knew this because I had seen the tracking app installed on his phone during the pizza party footage. She kept him on a digital leash, short enough to control, long enough to make him feel like he was moving freely. I waited in the parking garage, sitting in my car with the engine off, watching the elevators. At 12:15 p.m., David walked out. He wasn't heading to a lunch meeting or a restaurant. He was carrying a brown paper bag, walking with his head down, shoulders hunched against the world. He looked like a man whose spirit had been eroded, grain by grain, until only the fear remained. I honked the horn once, 2 short blasts, the signal I used to use when I picked him up from soccer practice 20 years ago. He froze. He looked around, wild-eyed, before spotting my sedan. I saw the panic flare in his eyes, the terrified calculation of a man wondering if he had time to run. I rolled down the window. "Get in, David," I said. It wasn't a request. It was the voice I used when a contractor tried to cut corners on a foundation pour. "Leave your phone in your car. We're going for a drive." He hesitated, looking back at the building as if Elena might be watching from a window 40 stories up. But old habits die hard. He was still my son, and I was still his father. He walked to his own car, tossed his phone inside, and then slid into my passenger seat. He smelled of stale coffee and anxiety. "Dad, I can't be here," he whispered, his hands gripping his knees. "If she calls and I don't answer, she gets worried. She thinks you're confused. She thinks you might be dangerous. She thinks a lot of things," I said, putting the car in gear and driving toward the lakefront. "She thinks I'm senile. She thinks I'm signing over power of attorney this week. She thinks you're a loyal soldier." I glanced at him. "And she thinks her name is Elena." David went rigid. The color drained from his face so fast I thought he might faint. "What?" I pulled into an empty spot overlooking the gray, churning water of Lake Michigan. I didn't look at him. I reached into the back seat and pulled out the blue velvet box. I placed it on the console between us. "Open it. Dad, please. You don't understand. Open it, David." He opened the box with trembling fingers. He saw the photos of Sophia Vance in Ohio. He saw the mugshot of Victoria Clark in Florida. He saw the timeline of a predator who had moved from state to state, leaving a trail of bankrupt men and broken families in her wake. He flipped through the pages, his breath coming in shallow hitches. When he reached the photo of himself, taken from a distance, showing him arguing with Elena in a parking lot, he dropped the file. "She told me her parents died in a car crash," he whispered. "She told me she had no one. She has a father in Florida who she robbed of $50,000, I said gently. She has a husband in Ohio who is still paying off the debts she racked up in his name. You want her partner, David. You're her mark." David covered his face with his hands. "It doesn't matter," he sobbed, the sound muffled by his palms. "It's too late. You don't know what she has on me, Dad. You don't know what she'll do." "I know about the video," I said. The silence that filled the car was absolute. David lowered his hands, staring at me with a look of pure horror. How could you know?" "Sam Miller," I said. "He found the metadata. She claims she has a video of you with a minor. She claims she found it on your laptop. She told you that if you ever tried to leave, or if you didn't help her get my money, she would send it to the partners at your firm. She'd send it to the police. She'd put you on a registry for the rest of your life." David nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I didn't do it, Dad. I swear to God. I don't remember it. One night, about 6 months ago, we had drinks. I woke up the next morning and she showed me the file. It looked like me. It sounded like me. But I would never. I couldn't. I know you didn't, I said firmly. I reached out and gripped his shoulder. David, look at me. It's a deep fake. It's AI generated. Miller had a forensic specialist analyze the file she keeps on her private cloud. The shadows are wrong. The pixelation around the jawline doesn't match. It's a high-quality forgery, just like the signature on my loan application. David stared at me, his mouth opening and closing. A fake? But it looked so real. That's what she does, I said. She builds realities. She constructed a reality where I'm senile. She constructed a reality where you're a predator. She uses fear as mortar to hold the bricks together. But it's not real, son. It's a facade. And facades can be knocked down. He slumped back against the seat, closing his eyes. She owns me, Dad. Even if the video is fake, the accusation, the investigation. I'd lose my license. I'd lose my job. Not if we expose her first, I said. Not if we prove that she is a career criminal who manufactures evidence to blackmail her victims. We have the proof, David. We have the Ohio case. We have the Florida case. We have the recording of her admitting she lied about the cameras. I leaned closer. But I need one more thing. I need you. David looked at the gray water. What do you need me to do? I need you to go back there, I said. I need you to walk into that house and kiss her on the cheek. I need you to ask her how her day was. I need you to be the terrified, beaten down husband she created. I can't, he whispered. I can't look at her knowing what I know. You have to, I said. Because the hearing is on Friday. If we try to fight this in family court with just documents, she'll drag it out. She'll claim the files are fake. She'll claim I'm paranoid. We need to catch her in the act. We need her to sign the papers, admit the fraud, and incriminate herself while the authorities are listening. The authorities? The FBI is involved now, David. Wire fraud across state lines. Identity theft. This isn't a civil dispute anymore. It's a federal investigation. David took a deep breath. He looked at the blue velvet box, then at me. I saw the change in his eyes. It wasn't confidence, not yet. But the terror had receded, replaced by a flicker of anger. The anger of a man who realizes he has been played for a fool by the person sleeping next to him. She wants the signing to be tomorrow night, David said quietly. She told me this morning. She's bringing a notary she paid off. She wants the power of attorney and the deed transfer signed at the same time. Tomorrow night, I repeated. Good. That gives us 24 hours. Dad, David said, his voice trembling again. If this goes wrong, if she senses anything. She won't, I said. Because she thinks she's already won. Arrogance is a structural flaw, David. It blinds you to the stress fractures. I started the car. Go back to work. Don't change your routine. Don't call me. When you come to the house tomorrow, look at the floor. Mumble. Be the man she thinks you are. Can you do that? David wiped his face with his sleeve. He looked at me, and for the first time in 3 years, I saw my son. I'll do it, he said. For Mom. For Mom, I agreed. I dropped him off a block away from his office. I watched him walk back toward the building, his step slightly lighter, the burden of the video lifted from his shoulders. He was still scared, but he was no longer a hostage. He was a mole. I drove home feeling a grim satisfaction. The team was assembled. The trap was set. Elena Sterling thought she was coming to harvest the last of my assets. She didn't know she was walking into a demolition site. The snow had returned by late afternoon, a heavy, wet blanket that muffled the sound of the city and turned my driveway into a pristine white sheet. Inside, the house was warm, but the atmosphere was brittle with tension. I stood in the dining room, adjusting the angle of the centerpiece, a vase of winter lilies that concealed a high-fidelity microphone in its base. Every line of sight was covered. Every whisper would be caught. I was no longer building a home, I was constructing a panopticon. At 6:45 p.m., the doorbell rang. I waited a full 10 seconds before answering, letting the anticipation build. When I opened the door, Elena was standing there, brushing snowflakes from the collar of a cashmere coat that likely cost more than my first car. She looked triumphant. There is a specific look a predator gets when they believe the trap has snapped shut on their prey, a relaxation of the shoulders, a smugness in the eyes. She held a leather portfolio against her chest like a shield. David stood behind her, his face pale, his eyes fixed on the ground. He looked exactly like the broken, terrified man she had molded him into. But when he glanced up at me, just for a fraction of a second, I saw it, the microscopic nod. "I'm ready." "Come in," I said, my voice trembling slightly. It's good to see you both." Elena swept into the hallway, bringing the cold air with her. "We wouldn't miss it, Dad. We're here to help you get everything sorted out. Did you find the papers I sent over?" I think so," I stammered, leading them into the dining room. I put them on the table. It's all so much legal language. I tried to read it, but my eyes, the words seemed to swim on the page lately. "That's why we're here," she said soothingly, taking her seat at the head of the table, my seat. She opened her portfolio and spread the documents out. "This is the power of attorney we discussed. It just gives David and me the ability to handle the bank, talk to the insurance company, make sure the bills are paid. It's strictly for your protection." I sat opposite her, wringing my hands. "And the house?" "The document mentions the house. Just for maintenance," she lied effortlessly. "So we can hire a plow service or fix the roof if it leaks. You don't have to worry about a thing." I looked at the papers. They were standard, broad-scope durable power of attorney forms. If I signed them, she could empty my accounts by morning. But that wasn't enough. Theft is one thing, federal wire fraud and real estate fraud are another. I needed her to reach for the crown jewel. "I've been thinking," I said slowly, staring at the grain of the oak table. "About what you said yesterday. About the house being too big for me." Elena froze, her pen hovering over the paper. "What do you mean?" "I'm lonely here," I whispered. "Every room reminds me of Martha. And the stairs. I slipped yesterday. I didn't tell you, but I fell. I lay there for an hour before I could get up." It was a lie, but it was the kind of lie she wanted to hear. It confirmed her narrative. I was frail, failing, and ready to collapse. "Oh, Dad," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "That's terrible. Why didn't you call us?" "I didn't want to be a burden," I said. "But you're right. I can't live here anymore." I was looking at the accounts, the upkeep, the taxes. "It's too much." I paused, taking a shaky breath. I think I want to sell it. Now. While the market is still high. I saw the greed flare in her eyes like a match struck in a dark room. This house was valued at $2.5 million. It was the prize she had been circling for 3 years. "Sell it?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual. "Well, that's a big decision. It usually takes months to list a property, get it staged." "No," I cut in. "I don't want strangers walking through Martha's garden. I don't want open houses." I leaned forward, lowering my voice. "I have a friend. A developer from my old firm. He's been trying to buy this lot for years. He offered me $2.2 million, cash. Quick close. No inspections." I watched David. He was gripping his water glass so hard his knuckles were white. He knew there was no developer. He knew this was the bait. Elena licked her lips. "Cash?" "Yes. He said he could wire the funds as soon as the deed is transferred." I looked at her with pleading eyes. "I want to give the money to you and David. I don't need it. I just want a small apartment. A place where I feel safe. The rest, it should go to family." The silence in the room was deafening. I could practically hear the gears turning in her mind. $2 million. Tax-free if she maneuvered it right. Immediate access. It was infinitely better than slowly draining a pension fund over 5 years. "That's incredibly generous of you, Dad," she said, her voice tight with suppressed excitement. "But if you sell it to a developer, the taxes will be enormous. And the waiting period." She leaned in, her predator instincts taking over. "There's a better way." "Is there?" "Transfer the deed to us," she said. "Tonight. We can put it in a family trust. Then we can sell it to your developer friend. It keeps the asset in the family, avoids the probate issues, and it protects you." "Transfer the deed?" I asked, feigning confusion. "But isn't that complicated?" "Not at all," she said, reaching into her portfolio. She pulled out a fresh document, a quitclaim deed. She had brought it with her. She had come here tonight intending to bully me into signing it eventually, but I had just invited her to skip straight to the execution. I actually prepared one, just in case we needed to secure the asset against creditors or medical bills. She slid the paper across the table. "If you sign this, we become the owners on paper. Just technical owners. Then we handle the sale for you, take the check, and set you up in a beautiful apartment. You won't have to lift a finger." I looked at the document. Grantor, Arthur Sterling. Grantee, Elena Sterling and David Sterling. "And the money?" I asked. "The $2 million. We'll open a joint account," she promised, her eyes wide and sincere. "You'll have access to everything. We just want to take care of you." It was the lie that sealed her fate. She was proposing a real estate transfer based on fraudulent pretenses, with the intent to liquidate the asset for personal gain. It was the definition of grand larceny and elder fraud. I don't know," I said, looking at the pen she was offering me. "Shouldn't I call my lawyer? Mr. Henderson always handles my contracts." "Mr. Henderson is old, Dad," she said sharply. "He takes weeks to return a call. And he charges you hundreds of dollars for a 5-minute conversation. Do you really want to pay him to tell you what your own family is already telling you?" She was pushing. She sensed the hesitation and she was pushing hard, just like she did with the aneurysm call. "Make it sound wetter. He's rich, not psychic." "I suppose you're right," I murmured. But it needs to be notarized, doesn't it? A deed isn't valid without a notary. Elena smiled, a shark breaking the surface. I thought of that. Since it's late, and we wanted to get the power of attorney done, I called a friend. He's a mobile notary. He's waiting in the car outside. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the drafty windows. She had brought a notary. She had planned to strip me of everything tonight, even before I offered the sale. My trap was effective, but her malice was preemptive. "Oh," I said. "Well, that's convenient. I'll text him," she said, pulling out her phone. "No need," I said, sitting up straighter. I invited a notary of my own. Elena froze. "What?" "I called a service this afternoon," I said, keeping my voice steady. Since I was planning to sign the power of attorney, I wanted to make sure it was done properly. He should be here any minute. The doorbell rang. Elena looked at the door, then back at me. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "You didn't tell me that." "I forgot," I said, tapping my head. "My memory, it comes and goes." But I wrote it down. 7 p.m. notary. I stood up and walked to the door. Elena watched me, her body tense. She didn't like variables she hadn't controlled. But the greed was still anchoring her to the chair. The deed was on the table. The $2 million was within reach. She wouldn't run. Not yet. I opened the door. Standing there was not a notary. It was a man in a gray suit, holding a heavy black bag. He looked like an accountant, unremarkable in every way. But I knew him. His name was Detective Harris, usually assigned to the Financial Crimes Division, currently working undercover as a favor to Sam Miller. "Good evening," Harris said. "I'm here for the signing." "Please, come in," I said. I led him into the dining room. Elena stood up, her smile reattached but strained. "Pie. We actually have someone waiting outside, so." "Nonsense," I said. "This gentleman is already here. Let's just get it done." "I'm tired, Elena. I just want to sign the papers and go to sleep." I saw the calculation in her eyes. She weighed the risk of a stranger against the immediate reward of the deed. Greed won. "Fine," she said, sitting back down. "Let's get it done." Harris sat at the end of the table. He pulled out a stamp and a logbook. "I'll need identification from all parties," he said professionally. Elena handed over her driver's license. Harris looked at it, then at her. He wrote the name down in his book. "Elena Sterling." "And a document?" Harris asked. She slid the quitclaim deed toward him. "Transfer of property," she said. "From father to son and daughter-in-law." "And the consideration?" Harris asked. "The payment for the property?" $10, she said. "It's a gift." "I see." Harris looked at me. "Mr. Sterling, are you signing this document of your own free will? Do you understand that you are transferring ownership of your home for $10? I looked at Elena. She was staring at me, her eyes drilling a silent command into my skull. "Sign it, old man. Sign it and die." "Yes," I said softly. "I understand. They promised to take care of me. They promised to sell it and put the money in a joint account. Is that correct, Mrs. Sterling?" Harris asked. "Yes," she said impatiently. "We're taking care of him." "Very well." Harris pushed the document toward me. "Sign here." I picked up the pen. My hand hovered over the signature line. I could feel the heat radiating from Elena. She was practically vibrating with anticipation. I signed my name. Arthur Sterling. Harris stamped the document. The sound was loud, final. Clack. Elena let out a breath she had been holding for 3 years. She reached out and snatched the deed from the table, clutching it like a winning lottery ticket. "Thank you, Dad," she said, her voice trembling with adrenaline. "You did the right thing." "I know," I said. I looked at David. "David, pour the wine. I think we should have a toast." Elena laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated triumph. "Yes. Let's have a toast." David stood up, his legs shaking. He walked to the sideboard and picked up the bottle of expensive Cabernet Elena had brought. He poured 3 glasses. He handed one to Elena, one to me, and kept one for himself. "To family," Elena said, raising her glass. I raised mine. "To family." We drank. The wine was rich, heavy with tannins. Elena took a long swallow, savoring the taste of victory. "Actually," I said, setting my glass down, "I'd like to propose a second toast." Elena looked at me, smiling over the rim of her glass. "Oh." "Yes," I said. My voice changed. The tremor vanished. The confusion evaporated. I sat up straight, squaring my shoulders, looking at her with the cold, precise gaze of an architect inspecting a condemned building. "To Sophia Vance," I said clearly. The glass slipped from her fingers. The snow outside was falling harder now, blanketing the driveway in a thick, suffocating silence that matched the atmosphere inside my study. Elena sat across from me, her posture rigid, her eyes scanning the documents on the mahogany desk with the predatory focus of a hawk circling a wounded field mouse. She was dressed in black, a performance of somber concern that clashed violently with the triumphant glitter in her eyes. David sat beside her, his shoulders slumped, looking less like a husband and more like a hostage who had forgotten what freedom tasted like. He refused to meet my gaze, staring instead at his hands, which were clasped so tightly together that his knuckles had turned the color of old bone. "It's for the best, Arthur," Elena said, her voice dripping with that rehearsed sweetness she reserved for moments of absolute manipulation. "The upkeep of this place, it's just too much for a man of your age. The assisted living facility in Highland Park is top tier. We've already paid the deposit." She pushed the pen toward me, the plastic clicking against the wood like a gunshot in the quiet room. "Once you sign the deed over to David and me, we can handle the sale, the taxes, everything. You won't have to worry about a single thing ever again." I looked at the pen, then at my son, waiting for him to speak, to protest, to show even a flicker of the boy Martha and I had raised. But he remained silent, a hollowed-out vessel of a man, drained by a decade of her gaslighting and emotional erosion. I picked up the pen, feeling the weight of it, and watched a small, tight smile tug at the corner of Elena's mouth. She thought this was the end of her long campaign, the final victory lap after years of isolating me, slandering my competence, and driving a wedge between me and my only child. She believed the architect was finally crumbling, a dilapidated structure ready to be condemned. "You're right, Elena," I said softly, my voice steady, betraying none of the cold fury that had been fueling me for the last 6 months. "This house is too big for one person. It holds too many memories. Martha and I built it to be a sanctuary, a place of truth." I paused, setting the pen down without removing the cap, and saw her smile falter, just for a fraction of a second. But before I sign away 40 years of my life, there is one small clerical error in these papers that we need to address. A name is spelled incorrectly. Elena let out a sharp, impatient breath, rolling her eyes as she reached for the document. Arthur, don't be pedantic. We can fix a typo later. The notary is waiting outside in the car. Just sign it. She tapped the signature line aggressively with her manicured nail. Which name? Is it Sterling? Did the lawyer miss a letter? No, I replied, opening the top drawer of my desk and pulling out a thick, leather-bound folder that had been resting there since the day of Martha's funeral. The error isn't with Sterling. The error is with Elena. I slid the folder across the desk, the heavy sound of it landing echoing in the room. The name on the deed transfer should be Sophia Vance. Or perhaps Elena Rostova. It gets confusing, doesn't it, when you've buried so many past lives? The color drained from her face so instantly it looked as if a plug had been pulled. The arrogance, the smug entitlement, the carefully constructed mask of the concerned daughter-in-law, it all evaporated, replaced by a stark, primal terror. David finally looked up, his brow furrowed in confusion, his eyes darting between me and his wife. Dad? What are you talking about? Who is Sophia Vance? Open the folder, David, I commanded, my voice dropping an octave, losing all traces of the gentle father and becoming the architect who demands structural integrity. Look at the woman you married. Look at the history she forgot to erase. David reached out with trembling hands, hesitating as if the leather burned his skin. Elena lunged for the folder, her composure shattering into desperate violence. Don't touch that. He's senile, David. He's making things up. We're leaving right now. She clawed at his arm, her nails digging into his sweater, but for the first time in years, David didn't flinch. He pulled away from her, the sheer force of her panic sparking a dormant curiosity, a survival instinct that whispered that something was terribly wrong. He opened the folder. The first photograph was a mugshot from 12 years ago, taken in Nevada. The woman in the picture was younger, her hair dyed a harsh blonde, but the eyes, cold, calculating, empty, were unmistakable. Beside it was a copy of a marriage license to a man named Thomas Vance, followed by a death certificate listing accidental overdose as the cause, and a forensic accounting report showing the transfer of his entire estate to his widow, Sophia, 2 days before she vanished. I hired a private investigator the day after you staged that aneurysm, Elena, I said, leaning back in my chair, watching the walls of her life close in. Martha never trusted you. She told me once that you looked at people like they were ATMs. She made me promise to watch you. And when you called me at 2:15 a.m. demanding $45,000 for a fake emergency, you triggered the failsafe she and I designed. David was flipping through the pages now, his breathing shallow and rapid. He saw the bank statements from the secret accounts she had opened in his name, siphoning off his salary for investments that didn't exist. He saw the transcripts of her text messages to a man in the city, mocking David's weakness, laughing about how easy it was to manipulate the old man and the coward. He saw the blueprint of her plan to put me in a stake-run facility and sell this house to pay off her gambling debts. This isn't real, David whispered, but his voice lacked conviction. The evidence was overwhelming, meticulous, undeniable. It was a blueprint of destruction, and he was the debris. It is real, David, I said, standing up slowly. Everything in that folder has been verified. The police have copies. The district attorney has copies. The only reason you aren't watching her be handcuffed right now is because I wanted you to see it first. I wanted you to see that the woman sitting next to you hasn't just been stealing your money. She has been stealing your life." Elena stood up, knocking her chair over. She looked wild, cornered, dangerous. "You think anyone will believe a grieving, confused old man?" she hissed, her voice venomous. "I'll tell them you abused me. I'll tell them you're mentally unstable. I own David. He'll say whatever I tell him to say." She turned to him, her face twisting into a grotesque parody of affection. "David, honey, listen to me. He's lying. He forged all of this. We need to go. Now." The room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. The clock on the mantel ticked. 1, 2, 3 seconds. David looked at the mugshot, then at the text messages where she called him a pathetic stepping stone. He looked at me, standing tall and unbroken, the father who had built skyscrapers and who was now trying to rebuild his son. Then he looked at Elena. "You called me a coward," David said, his voice barely a whisper, yet it carried more power than any shout. He stood up, towering over her, the physical difference in their size suddenly apparent now that his emotional shackles were loosening. "In these texts, you said I was a pathetic coward who would never leave you." "David, please," she begged, reaching for his hand, but he stepped back, revulsion rippling across his face. "Get out," he said. It wasn't a scream. It was a statement of fact. A structural decision. "What?" Elena blinked, stunned. "Get out of my father's house," David said, his voice gaining strength, grounding itself in the truth I had laid before him. "Get out of my life. If you are still here in 2 minutes, I will let Dad call the police. And I will testify against you. Every single day." Elena looked at me, expecting mercy, expecting that nice old man to intervene. But she found only the architect, observing the demolition of a condemned building. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply picked up the phone on my desk and held the receiver in my hand, waiting. She didn't scream. She didn't fight. Like the coward she truly was, she grabbed her purse and fled, the sound of her heels clicking frantically down the hallway, followed by the heavy slam of the front door. The silence she left behind was pure, clean, and heavy with grief. David stood there for a long time, staring at the empty doorway, tears streaming silently down his face. I walked around the desk and placed a hand on his shoulder. He turned and collapsed into me, sobbing like a child who had finally been found in the dark. "I'm so sorry, Dad," he choked out, his body shaking with the release of years of tension. "I'm so sorry." "I know, son," I whispered, holding him tight, feeling the ghost of Martha smiling in the corner of the room. "I know. But the foundation is still good. We can rebuild." The flashing lights in the driveway that night were not the chaotic strobe of an emergency, but the steady, rhythmic pulse of justice. Elena, or Sophia, or whatever name she was trying to wear that week, didn't make it to the state line. The police picked her up less than 10 miles away, her car stalled on the shoulder of the interstate, her pockets full of jewelry she had swiped from David's dresser in her haste to flee. When they brought her in, she tried to play the victim one last time, weeping about a tyrannical father-in-law and a husband who abused her. But the dossier I had compiled, the architect's blueprint of her past lives and current crimes, was a structure she couldn't tear down. It was watertight, reinforced by forensic accounting and the undeniable weight of her own history. She is currently awaiting trial in Nevada for fraud and suspicion of involvement in the death of Thomas Vance, and this time, there is no one left to bail her out. David didn't recover overnight. The demolition of a life, even a fraudulent one, leaves a lot of debris, and my son had to sift through the wreckage of 10 years of manipulation. There were days when he wouldn't leave his room, crushed by the shame of having been so blind, of having let her isolate him from the people who actually loved him. But I didn't push him. I didn't offer platitudes or "I told you so's." I simply sat with him, just as I had when he was a boy building Lego towers on the living room rug. We rebuilt his finances slowly, brick by brick. We secured his credit, dissolved the sham investments she had set up, and I watched as the color slowly returned to his face, and the spark of the man he was supposed to be began to flicker back into existence. The real hero of this story, however, was never me. I was just the instrument, the hands that executed the plan. The architect was Martha. It was my late wife who, in her final months of battling cancer, saw what I was too proud to admit and what David was too in love to see. She saw the predator circling our family. She was the one who insisted we install the localized server for the security cameras, not the cloud-based one Elena could hack. She was the one who hired the private investigator years ago, leaving his contact info in a sealed envelope marked, "For Arthur, when the snow falls." She knew that her death would leave a vacuum, and she knew exactly who would try to fill it. Her love wasn't just a warm feeling, it was a fortress she built around us, a series of fail-safes and protections designed to trigger only when we needed them most. I visit Martha's grave every Sunday, and last week, David came with me for the first time in years. We stood there in the quiet cold of the cemetery, the snow crunching softly under our boots, and for a long time, neither of us said a word. David reached out and touched the cold marble of her headstone, tracing the letters of her name. "She knew, didn't she, Dad?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "She knew even before I did." I nodded, placing a hand on his shoulder. "She knew you were worth protecting, David," I replied. "And she knew that one day, you'd be strong enough to walk through the door she opened." We left the cemetery not as a broken old man and his ruined son, but as two survivors standing on a foundation that had been tested by the fiercest storm and had held firm. This journey has taught me that age is not a verdict of weakness, and silence is not a sign of surrender. Too often, society looks at people with gray hair and sees only fragility. They assume we are confused, outdated, or easy targets for those with quicker tongues and sharper greed. But they forget that we have lived through winters they can only imagine. They forget that patience is a weapon that only gets sharper with time. I spent months letting Elena believe she was winning, letting her think I was the doddering old fool she mocked in her texts. I let her underestimate me because her arrogance was the mortar that held my trap together. If you are listening to this, and you feel dismissed or invisible because of your age, remember this: you are the architect of your own dignity. Do not let anyone evict you from your own life. I also want to speak to those of you who might be watching a family member drift away, pulled into the orbit of someone who isolates them, drains them, and changes who they are. It is the hardest thing in the world to watch someone you love choose their own destruction. But do not look away. Do not let the silence become permanent. Martha didn't fight Elena with screaming matches or ultimatums. She fought her with truth, documented and preserved. If you suspect financial exploitation or emotional abuse, start building your own blueprint. Keep records. Ask questions. Be the ghost in the room who sees what others miss. Your vigilance might be the only lifeline they have when the water finally gets too deep. Thank you for walking this road with Arthur and David. Thank you for listening to a story that is, unfortunately, all too common in our world today. If this story moved you, if it made you think of your own parents or your own children, I hope you will share it. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that they are not alone. Share it with someone who needs the courage to set a boundary or the strength to open a folder they've been afraid to look at. We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to protect a family member from themselves? Have you ever felt the presence of a loved one guiding you through a crisis? Your stories are what build this community, and reading them reminds me that while evil may be loud, the quiet power of good is always stronger. Please like this video and subscribe to our channel so you never miss a story of justice, resilience, and the enduring power of a family that refuses to break. Until next time, remember, the house is only as strong as its foundation, and the truth is the only concrete that lasts forever. Take care of each other.